Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. We're just getting started here, so we're just going to give it a minute or so and let people who are going to be attending live to come on live. So if you're watching on the recording, you might just want to go forward maybe a minute or so until we start the class. For those of you who are joining live, welcome. If you'd like to say hello in the chat box there's a little drop down above it that gives you some different options, one of which is host and panelists. The other is everyone. And Anne-Marie just gave us a nice example of that. Hello, Anne-Marie. So if you say hello or you make any comments or questions or anything like that, it'd be super if you could have your settings to everyone, because then everybody can see your questions. So Louise, I'm going to use you as an example. So Louise, your settings are to host and panelists, which means that I'm the only one that can see your comments and everything. So if you could change your settings, there's a little drop down above where you typed hello, and that will give you different options. If you choose everyone, then everybody can see your questions and comments and stuff as we go along. Okie dokie, we are going to get started now. So fermented cheesecakes are kind of a specialty of mine. I've been doing them for a really long time. And once you know how to make all the base elements, most importantly, the cheese, I think that's probably the one. She's got it. Louise has got it. Once you know how to make the cheese, you can, and you know, you have a few crust recipes that you like, you can chop and change the cheeses, you can change the flavor, you can change all kinds of stuff about it. So they're super versatile, and I really love them for that reason. The other reason is because the cashew that we use in the filling is not your traditional way that people will make it. It's usually just soaked cashews blended with some other like sweeteners and then things to make it set. And in this case, we're using fermented cashews, and fermented cashews give an aeration to the cheesecake, and it does make it feel lighter. In fact, during the fermenting process, the fat gets reduced because it gets eaten by the bacteria. So it will feel like a much lighter result. And if you've never tried it before, really, it is worth trying it rather than just soaking the cashews. It's a totally different feeling to the cheesecake. It's a very easy process. Once you get into it, I think that there can be a little bit of like fear or ambivalence at the start when you first start fermenting stuff, because it is scientific and it can go wrong. But once you learn how to do it, you see that it's actually quite simple, and like it's a little bit difficult for things to go wrong, really. So the first thing that we're going to start with here is the caramel sauce that's going to go on top, because we're just going to need to cool that down before we put it on top of the cheesecake. Um, so hi, Sherry. You are very welcome for the class. Thanks for being here. What time is it for you, Sherry? Because aren't you North America? Like 9, 8 a.m., something like that? Welcome. Well done on making the effort to be here. So you can use any nut or seed for this. 9 a.m. It's a good way to start the day. Cup of coffee, whatever, matcha. And we're going to warm the pan. We're going to use peanuts today because it's a Snickers cheesecake. I've done this with pecans, hazelnuts. It's all very nice. You can use maple syrup, coconut sugar, honey, agave, whatever you want to use. And I'm using Oatly non-dairy cream. You can use any kind of non-dairy cream that you like for this recipe, or dairy. I've never tested it, but I would assume it would work. Hopefully, I have no idea. Coconut cream would also work. And then once the pan is warm, I'm going to add in the nuts. Now the nuts are pre-roasted, so we're not trying to roast them here. We're just getting them a little bit warm, pan warm, so that when the maple syrup and the cream hits the pan, it begins to reduce. I'm going to add a little bit of sea salt to the cream mixture. You can add spices to this. You could add vanilla, whatever you want. And I'm, again, using maple syrup, as I said. So if I just mix this through, you'll see the maple kind of swirl around in there. There's our maple syrup. Okay, so this goes in, going to immediately start to sizzle away. And then all we want to do at this point is reduce this mixture. So you can see at this point, it's very creamy from the cream. And as we reduce the mixture, it's going to become more translucent and more sort of just maple syrup colored, really. So at this point, the main thing with this caramel sauce is watching the reduction take place and knowing the signs to look for in the reduction. So this is a very similar way to the way that I make my caramels, where it's a reduction rather than a caramelization, because we don't caramelize things like maple syrup and coconut sugar. They don't caramelize like white sugar. So, and I'm just going to move this so it doesn't fog the camera lens. So we're getting that boiling, and you can see lots of bubbles here. Kind of looks coffee colored at this point. And we want to just reduce that liquid down by about half. And as I was saying, because it's not a caramelization like white sugar, there are other signs that we're going to have to look for, not temperature. So with caramelization, you'd be looking for a particular temperature point to hit, and then you would take it off the heat. With this, we're looking for visual cues rather than like more science. What's the word? Lost the word. When I teach, I lose words. Well, I was going to say scientific points, scientific being the temperature, 105 degrees, for example. So for this, we're looking for visual cues. So at the moment, what I can see is it's already started to lose that creamy color. And we got a little bit of froth on the side that we just need to keep mixing into the center so that reduces. The bubbles will begin to be thicker rather than as like at the start, there's lots of little bubbles. As it reduces, that will thicken. I'm using quite a high temperature here just to move it along, so we're not, you can do it on a slightly lower temperature if you want. So now at this point, I'm seeing some clarification where that frothiness, even around the sides, has stopped quite a lot. Now, if you were to stop at this point, that's a lot of sauce, and it's going to be very drippy. So the further that you reduce it at this point, the thicker it's going to become when it goes set, so when it's cool. And there is that kind of sweet spot that you want to hit between it being not reduced enough and reduced a bit too far. And that really does come with experience. So maybe the first time you do it, you over reduce it and there's not enough kind of, gooiness and sauciness. Maybe the next time you do it, you don't reduce it enough and then it's a little bit too, but you'll find that kind of middle ground after doing it a few times. And here it's now looking quite good. So we've got quite a bit of reduction going on. I can feel a bit of stickiness on the bottom of the pan when I drive my spatula through. And once this stops steaming, I'll just move it a bit closer to the camera so you can see what it looks like. And so that's our final texture. So if I do that, you can see there's not like loads of sauce in the pan there, but there is a coating. As I go through, I can see it coating all the peanuts like that. So we're going to just put this into a bowl that's large for the amount of contents that we have, just so it cools fast. And I'm just going to put this in my windowsill. The window's open, and that'll cool a bit quicker. We don't want this to be really hot when it goes on top of the cheesecake, or it's going to melt the cheese. So I'm just going to cool this down to room temperature while we work on the other elements. You can, of course, do this the day before if you want, so you don't have to worry about cooling it fast or anything like that. Okay. The next thing that we're going to work on is going to be the crust. And this is a basic crust recipe that I use in variations throughout my sort of cheesecakes and tarts and things if I want to do a no-bake, quick crust. So food processor. This is a 6-inch tin that has a releasable bottom. It is called a sandwich tin. It's not like your typical springform. It releases from there rather than from the sides. And that's just lined with cling film. So it's easy to get that out of the tin afterwards when it sets. And then we just got our food processor here. And then these are all of our dry ingredients. So we've got oat flour, ground almonds, coconut flour, and in this case, coconut sugar. You could replace the coconut sugar with maple syrup. You could replace it with xylitol, cane sugar, whatever you want to do. Notes on exchanging sugars is if you're going to trade out a dry sweetener for a wet sweetener, that wet sweetener is going to become some of your liquid ingredients in the crust. So at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of water to bring the whole thing together. But if you're using a liquid sweetener, you'll need less water or like maybe not water at all when it comes to the end. With a dry sweetener, it's going to be a much drier mix from the start. And so we're going to add water at the end to just bring the mixture together so that we can put it into the pan. So all of this goes into our food processor, and we're just going to add a little bit of salt. and then just mix this up so it's well combined. And with food processors, I don't know about you guys, but I always find that the edges and under the blade is where things kind of hide, like lumps of ingredients and stuff, liquid and dry. So I like to just give it a physical mix as well. And then at this stage, we're going to add in our oils. So for setting this crust, I'm using a combination of coconut oil with a little bit of cocoa butter. So it's 20 grams in total. You can split it out as you like, or you can just use one or the other. And then just get that mixed through. Scrape down the sides. Get under the blades if you need to. At this point, there's nothing really down there. And it's at this stage that we're now going to start adding in a little bit of water to get the texture that we're looking for. If that had been maple syrup that we were using, it would have already been essentially at this stage that you see here, where it's kind of sandy. So it has that kind of wet feel, but it's not really going to hold together at this stage. And then from here, we would just be adding water in order to bring that together. And go easy with the water, because once you add too much of it, you can't take it away. You have to add more dry ingredients to make up for it. So just go very little at a time. If you need to, use a spoon or a teaspoon or something like that to just add a very little bit at a time until you reach the texture that you're looking for. Let's see. So for me, I do a little grab test. It can look like it's quite, not going to come together, but when you press it, you start to see that actually it is going to hold together pretty well. And at this point, that's kind of perfect. I think that's a good texture as far as I'm concerned. And then into your prepared tin, you're just going to get your crust ingredients in there. Depending on how much experience you have with doing a crust in this way, you might have just like a bit left over, or you might have not have any left over. It'll also depend on the thickness of the crust that you're wanting to do as well. So to keep this a little bit on the cleaner side, I'm going to use a little bit of water. I'm going to wet my fingers, and that's just going to help keep the mixture from sticking to my hands. It's not a lot of water. It's just so that my hands are damp so it just doesn't stick. And I start to just establish the sides first. So grab some crust from the middle and just press it onto the side of the tin. And at this stage, you don't have to think about or worry about what it's going to look like. We're just getting a bit of a foundation laid here. Once it starts to feel like your hands are drying out or it's starting to stick, just a touch more water. And then you want to start kind of more establishing the crust. So this is looking like there's a bit too much, so I'm going to take a little bit out. I typically don't use all of the mix. There's generally a little bit left over when I do it, but I do prefer that it's like a thinner crust rather than a thicker one. And using the coconut sugar here, it does give that sort of brown sugar feel to it. Like I called it a brown sugar crust because the coconut sugar does give it that sort of more demerara brown sugar kind of feel to it. So at this point, there's fingerprints all up in it. You could stop there if you wanted to, but I'm gonna flatten it all out. Try to get as flat and even as a base as I can. And then all those fingerprints I'm gonna want to get out. So just use a teaspoon, just a little bit damp in the back so again it doesn't stick. And then gently go around and just smooth the base and smooth the sides. Once you start to feel it stick, it feels like it's starting to stick, but I'll just see how this goes. If it starts to pull the crust up, that's your indication that you need to add a bit more liquid to the spoon to stop it from pulling the crust. Okay, that's looking good. Missing a little bit of crust on this side here. Just give that a little bit there. And you can go as, you can do as much or as little as you want here. You don't have to make it all pretty. It's just a matter of when you cut it, what the crust is going to look like, and then also the thickness of it as well. And then we just have these little scraggly bits on top. So you just take the back of a knife, not the blade, and just remove those bits. You can use an offset spatula for this as well. And then there's our final crust. And that's just going to go to the side here. If doing the crust takes you like 10 minutes, don't worry about it. Just take the amount of time that you need in order to get it the way that you want it to be. The good thing about this type of no-bake crust is you've got plenty of time to work with it. It's not going to get tough if you like overwork it or anything. And now we'll get started with the fermented cream. Often people will ask if you can sub out the cashews for a different nut. Cashews have a really special kind of consistency in that they go creamy. They don't have a whole lot of fiber, whereas nuts like almonds, they have quite a lot of fiber. So when you, for example, make almond milk, and you soak the almonds in water and then you blend them with water, they go, well, you have to sieve it, don't you? Like it becomes a cream rather than like a cream cheese mixture. So you can use other nuts. They're going to have a very different texture to using cashews. Okay, let's just have a look here. So we've got our soaked cashews here that we're going to, Sherry's asking, do you think you could use a ring instead of a pan if I line it like you have? Yeah, I don't see why not. In fact, so I was thinking about this. I was thinking about doing like just a crust on the base, but then I was thinking about the caramel on top. But yeah, you want to do individual ones, don't you? Because you sell them to the restaurant. Is that why you're asking? Yeah. The only thing I'd be thinking, well, yeah, no, fine. Yes, you can. Yeah, if you're gonna do the crust up the sides like I just did, yeah, that's fine. I think you could even press it into the base and then put the caramel on because it does thicken when it cools. Yeah, I understand. I don't think the size really matters as much as if the crust goes up the side, then it creates a barrier so that the caramel can't leak out. At the same time, if you were selling them to the restaurant and they were frozen and then they're thawing them, I don't know. I think that it would leak over the sides. So you'd have to do the sides, which I was just trying to think if there's an easy way for you to do it, but no, that'd be the way. So we've got our soaked cashews here. They've just been soaked in warm water and then sieved. And then we're going to ferment them. So there's two ways that you can do this. When you first start out, if you've never done it before and you don't have any kind of previously fermented batch of cheese around, then you can either use probiotics. I've linked to the ones that are good in the class document. And if you can't get those where you are, then just have a look at what's in them and then find a probiotic that's similar to that where you are. So you can do that for your first batch. So let's say you use probiotics. You put this, you're going to do the same process that we're about to do. So you put your cashews into the blender, and then you add your probiotic capsules, add a little bit of water, and you blend it up. So after you do that and you ferment your cheese is going to be, this is like, I do that because you can hear a hollowness in that. And that's because it's aerated. When I take the top off, you can also see that nothing really sticks to it. When you first put the cheese in, that's an indication it's fermented, by the way, not just, a pat on my back or anything. It doesn't stick because it's been fermented. If this wasn't fermented and I took that off, it would stick and it would just be like taking it off of like cream. But there's something in the fermentation that stops this from sticking and nothing really comes off of it, really. It's very little. And then the next thing is you can see little air bubbles on the surface there. And when I do this, you can see lots and lots of aeration through that, a little bit like cottage cheese in that kind of aeration, or sourdough. You smell it, it smells sour. So from this point, if you were to do that with probiotics, what you could do is take half of this or all of it. I would do all of it, and put it into a silicone ice cube tray or an ice cube tray, whatever, freeze it, and then pop them out, put them in a bag, put them in the freezer. Then when you want to ferment a batch of cheese, you take 1 or 2 of those out, pop them with your cashews, and you've got your starter. You don't have to pay for probiotics ever again to do this. And I started doing it this way because probiotics got really expensive. They went up 50%, which I thought was insane. And I thought there's got to be another way of doing this. So I tested it and it worked really, really well. So I'm just going to take some of this and add it in here as my starter. I was just going to say something. Oh, the other thing is when you ferment this way, okay, let's different way. So when you ferment the cashews with probiotics, the probiotics are dormant when they're in the container that you buy them in. When you ingest them, the heat from your gut is what activates the probiotics. So in this case, these are active already. So when you put them in, you don't have to activate them with heat because they're already activated. So they ferment at a low temperature. These were I did yesterday around this time. So they take about 12 to 24 hours to ferment. Versus if you did it with probiotic capsules, you might have like a 24 to 48 hour window of fermentation because they're not active yet and you need the right conditions. With these, you don't need to worry about the conditions. It ferments no matter what. So this is what I think you want to be heading towards if you're going to be doing this. Saves you money, and also it's just much easier to do. So at this stage, we're going to add some water. And we just really want enough for the cashews to blend. So I'm going to stop there. And if we need a bit more water, I'll add a bit more. Okay. So we just want that to be smooth because this is the only time that we're going to have to blend it to make it smooth. The next blending process we're going to do is just to be incorporating ingredients in. I'm really glad you tried it, Sherry, and that you enjoyed it. I think it made me really happy when it worked. Nothing like saving money. Okay, so now this mixture goes into bowl. And you can even see the difference between the fermented and, if you ferment it or if you don't ferment it at this stage. Because of the aeration, this puffs up. So you can just visually see how much lighter it becomes. And that translates directly into how it feels when you eat it as well. And then the plastic goes on top just to stop the top from drying out. And if it dries out, it creates a little crust on top. And then you have to blend that through. And I'd rather not have to do that. So just do that, put it to the side. And then within about 12 hours, that's going to be fermented. So at this stage, we now have our fermented cheese. And that goes into the blender. And in terms of like a basic recipe here, what we need in order for this to work is just that with some coconut oil or cocoa butter in order to make it set and stand. And then because it's a sweet cheesecake, some sweetener. So I've got my oils here that are melted down. And it's good if you do this when the cream cheese there is at room temperature. If you do it from the fridge and it's cold, when the oils hit the cold cheese, it's going to set. So really important. Now, it's not like the biggest deal in the world if that happens. If it happens, you just keep the blender running for a while. It'll conduct its own heat and it'll warm it to the point that the oils melt again. But it's just a bit of a process and it can be a little bit messy and annoying. So the best thing really is to avoid that entirely by just using room temperature cheese, or you can warm the cheese in the pan with the oils and then put it into the blender. So you're not trying to heat it, you're just warming it through it, if it came out of the fridge. So we've got, for the filling, this would just be a plain cheesecake. There's sourness in the cheese already, so I'm not going to add anything like lemon to it. And it's a chocolate one, so I don't want to add more acidity to it than is necessary. If I was doing a lemon cheesecake, I would add lemon juice, maybe some lemon zest, lemon essential oil, something like that to it. But for a chocolate cheesecake, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going for a super rich chocolate here. I'm going for something that's like a bit of a lighter chocolate feel to it. I don't want it to be overpowering to the entire thing. So I've got my coconut sugar here, which is what I've choose to use. For the sweetener, you could use maple syrup, agave, whatever you want. That goes in. Now, do note also that anytime you add powders, like, so for example, the coconut sugar is going to turn to a liquid against other liquid, but the cocoa powder will absorb liquid. So if you add too much of it, you're going to find that it actually thickens the mixture, and we don't want that. If it's too thick, it's going to be difficult to pour into the crust. So like I said, this next stage, we're not trying to blend it for texture. We're just blending it to get the ingredients to go through. So it's just a bit of just to get that combined. A bit of tamari, which is a wheat-free soy sauce. That's going to intensify the cocoa flavor without having to add more cocoa. And then that's our chocolate cream cheese filling. So we've got our crust here. And then I'm just going to pour in, so it fills about 3/4 or so of the way. And it does have that kind of milk chocolatey look to it, the cream, which is what we want. Give it a little shake. Now I do have extra here. I have extra from the one that I made in preparation for the class as well. I'll put them together into a container and I'll freeze them. And then if I ever want to do a chocolate cheesecake, I already have the filling for it, basically. You could alternatively pour this into a container or a bowl, set it in the fridge. And then if you wanted to pipe on top, if you weren't doing the caramel, for example, you could use that as a piping cream as well. So that's our finish. You see, I leave a little bit of space there for the caramel. So this is going to go fridge. It'll take maybe 3-4 hours, depending on how warm it got during blending. Just set in the fridge. And if you do the freezer, it'll set within enough for you to put the caramel on within maybe like 30, 45 minutes up to an hour, maybe. Okay. So now we're going to get our caramel on top. I'll just actually remove it from the tin. So that's what the tin looks like. And before we do anything else, I'll show you what it looks like. Then we'll get the caramel on. And even as I stir this, it already is like sticky, gooey, like not what it was like at all when it went into the bowl. So you start to see that kind of caramelly stringiness forming, which is lovely. Still a little bit warm, so if it melts the cheesecake a bit, that's why. Could have used another 10 minutes to cool, really. Hey ho. And if you wanted to, you could like chop the nuts so that you didn't have big pieces of peanut on top, but I thought for a Snickers cheesecake, it would suit it to have big pieces of peanut on there. And then if you serve it straight away, it's not going to give the sauce a lot of time to kind of like filter down. You'll see that in a moment when I cut it. The best thing is to give it like 30 minutes for the caramel sauce to kind of filter into the surface of the cheesecake. And then you get some really lovely saucy goodness. And that's our finished cheesecake. Looking mucho, mucho lovely. lovely caramel sauce on top. You could do a little sea salt on top when you serve it. Maybe some like chocolate sauce if you know how to make that. Make that. And that is our cheesecake for today's class. So any questions from the lovely people here live with us before we finish up? So just to say, you'll be getting the class recording after class. If you should misplace it for any reason, you can sign up again. But actually, I don't think it's going to send it to you that way. If you should lose it for any reason, just email me and I'll send it back over to you. You have lifetime access to that. But as I say with all my live streams, I think probably download it would be the safest thing to do, so that you're insured to have it, for forever. Paula, that looks great and simpler than I thought. Yes, fantastic. They are simpler than they look. They are. So I hope you will give it a go. I hope everybody will give it a go. Let me know how it is for you. Thanks. Lovely to be back with you, Amy. It's nice to see you. And Marie, thank you very much for coming. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed making it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Bye, everybody. You're welcome, Goda. Bye. Bye.